Hello, everybody. Today I'm speaking to Stephen Bevan, who is one of our Working with Cancer ambassadors, about his experience of working with cancer and what advice he would give to others about returning to work during or after treatment. So, Stephen, good to see you today.
Hi.
Perhaps you could just start by introducing yourself and what you do.
Right, yeah, so I'm Stephen Bevan. I'm Head of HR Research Development at the Institute for Employment Studies, which is a 52-year-old research charity. And we do research on, among other things, the impact of health on work and work on health. And my focus for the last few years has been, ironically, people living with chronic conditions at work.
Okay, you say ironically, so tell us about your cancer diagnosis and treatment.
Yeah, so after lots of years of looking at how people with a range of chronic conditions cope at work, 2018, I noticed that I was having a real trouble swallowing and was only really comfortable eating soft food. And that caused quite a bit of distress. And I was hoping that it might be something like a hiatus hernia or at worst Barrett's esophagus. But unfortunately, I got a diagnosis of esophageal cancer. The good news, I suppose, if there is any, that it was very localized and hadn't spread anywhere. So I had some chemotherapy, which wasn't fun, which at least got me to a position where I had stable disease. Then I had an esophagectomy, which is named after the inventor, Ivor Lewis, who in the 30s developed a very complex but increasingly successful surgical intervention, which basically means chopping the top of your stomach off and the bottom of your esophagus and then stitching them together to give you a whole new canal for your food to go down. That was successful. And then I had more chemo and then some radiotherapy as a sort of belt and braces approach. And then, so by August 2019, I had the no evidence of cancer conversation with my consultant. And I've been fine since, so almost 2 years on, asymptomatic, back to work, living a relatively normal life.
Okay, well, good to hear that life has got back to something which is relatively normal. And looking back, what were and maybe still are the main challenges that you faced in managing work in cancer, and how have you dealt with those?
I mean, I think I've been remarkably lucky, I have to say. I mean, my employer has been probably textbook how you would like it to be. And I mean, since working with you, Barbara, and your brilliant colleagues at Working with Cancer, I've learned a massive amount about the challenges other people have, and perhaps people less fortunate than me, working with employers who perhaps have a lower understanding or less understanding. So I feel very privileged that my employer has been brilliantly supportive. I suppose that what they've done is allowed me to take the lead on my return to work and what I've been doing and so on. So that means if I get into trouble by having too much work or excessive workload, that's sort of my fault, which I certainly have done. But I'd felt under no pressure to come back to work quickly. They were very happy to listen to what would suit me best in terms of a phased return and so on. And I've had some brilliant colleagues who've just stepped in and helped with some of the projects that I couldn't do while I was away having treatment and so on. So, I do feel, very privileged that I've worked for an organisation that, has done this so well. I mean, I have had problems, but they're more clinical problems. And I guess, fatigue has been a big issue for me, particularly after both chemo and radiotherapy in relatively quick succession. I have that sort of horrible, haunting fear that it's all going to come back. And with esophageal cancer, you don't get blood tests, you don't get scans. If it comes back, then you're onto palliative chemotherapy and, slippery slope. There's a sort of feeling of isolation, which, even though I've got great colleagues and so on, that's something that I think a lot of people experience. And I suppose the other thing, which is very hard to deal with, is the assumption that if you look okay, people assume you're coping. And for the most part, I do. but sometimes I really don't. And it's sort of hard to know how to deal with that, because I really don't want to be a burden to people. But at the same time, you sort of want to put your hand up and say, actually, I'm not doing so well at the moment. And I find that quite hard to do.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm sure many people are finding those, experiencing some of those challenges with side effects now. And Zoom, of course, doesn't help. Because you just get a 2D impression of somebody, you don't really find out how they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, from your own experience, what did your employer or colleagues, do you think, do or say that proved most helpful? And maybe, what was the least helpful, would you say?
I don't think they did anything that was unhelpful at all. I mean, I suppose it was a really weird period, because we just had a really close colleague who sadly got a diagnosis of liver cancer and died relatively quickly. And so in a sense, we had exposure to all the challenges of very severe situation with her. And essentially, I got my diagnosis a week before I did the eulogy at her funeral. It was really weird sort of tag game that we were playing. And then since then, we've had another colleague who's had quite a serious problem. Luckily, she's overcome that. But so we've sort of had quite a bit of practice. So I think as an organisation, it's been overwhelmingly helpful. And I wouldn't say that anyone has done anything insensitive or unhelpful. And I just feel really privileged. But we've learned a lot, and it's helped us to be really good at managing those situations. So I hope it's part of the fabric of the way that we as an organisation manage that. But I'm completely prepared to accept that other people have many more difficult situations. And I think for us, it's a bit like, cobbler's children. We do work on this topic, and so we should be good at it. And thank goodness we are.
Good. Okay. So, what advice or top tips would you like to pass on to others who are listening to this recording?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that I've learned that I would probably advise other people to think about. So, I mean, staying in touch is one thing. It's easy to get involved in your treatment, and that can be very difficult. But people do want to hear from you. And you'll always find colleagues who want to stay in touch, but do be proactive about that. I think that's quite important. Don't rush going back to work, but do it before you perhaps think you're completely ready, by phasing it. Just a visit in to have a cup of tea with someone, if we ever get back to the workplace, that is. But that sort of social connection. I was absolutely terrified about going back into the office. First time I did. It was completely irrational. But when I left after a couple of hours of just chatting to people and catching up, I felt so, felt like I'd been a bit stupid being worried about it. But I felt so pleased and proud of how brilliant my colleagues have been. I really did think, why did you get so upset and anxious about it? So dive in. I suppose the third thing is say what you want to happen. It may not always work out, it may not be possible, but unless you're being assertive about what will work for you at that particular stage of your return to work that you're at, just say. It's up, there's a legal requirement, of course, for employers under the Equalities Act and so on to accommodate you. But it should never get to that stage. It should be about, a grown-up conversation about what it is you would like to happen. And they should be able to provide you with the support to get you there. So they're the three main things I would advise.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's great advice. And thinking more widely, Stephen, are there any changes you'd like to see here in the UK to improve the ability of people to manage work and cancer and return to work if they wish to?
Yeah, I think we've got a bit of a distance to travel still in the UK. We've still got this strange paradox that we've got, higher and higher cancer survival rates, and yet return to work rates for people of working age with cancer survivors, is still pretty poor. About half of people who are diagnosed with cancer of working age, but only 2/3 are still in work a year after their diagnosis. So something's going wrong. I think there are 2 or 3 things I would suggest. First of all, healthcare professionals have got to really be more aware that work is an important clinical outcome for patients. You know, there are barriers around mental health, around finances, about rehabilitation and so on. But, you know, my experience, although brilliant, you know, through the NHS system, was there's still a bit of a blind spot amongst some healthcare professionals about the importance to people of work, not just for money, but for social connection and so on, and for their mental health. And I was in a bizarre situation where I was explaining to a therapeutic radiotherapy person what vocational rehabilitation was, because she'd never heard of it. And so I think we need a bit more, you know, improved practice in that area. The second area, I think, is better support to employers, particularly small employers, to make adjustments. And I think we've got schemes like the Access to Work scheme, for example, that provides in-work support for people to return to work and to make adjustments and so on. I just think that we're not using that effectively enough, particularly for people living with cancer. And then I think we need more self-management guidance for people living with cancer. I think, you know, Working with Cancer has produced some really good material on this. But, you know, we want to play an active part in our return to work. We don't want to be passive recipients of sort of charitable good works. You know, we know what's best for us. We should be assertive in saying so. And I think we need more guidance for individuals, so that it gives them the confidence to know how to have those conversations with managers who may be just as nervous as you about having the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I do think that for employers, managing somebody returning to work after cancer is probably one of the most challenging things that they can do. Very difficult, and very often don't know what to do or to say to support people.
Yeah.
And often get it wrong, not through any ill will, but they just get it.
No, that's right.
So finally, is there anything else you'd like to add that you feel is relevant and important for people listening to this interview?
Yeah, I suppose at the risk of getting philosophical and metaphysical about it, I mean, I suppose cancer does change your perspective on what's important. That's one of the big things I've learned. Sort of rational, I suppose, and logical to think that, but till you've experienced it, it's hard to really put into words. That includes things like the nature and the purpose and the importance of work in your life. And that's bound to change. So if your job feels like it's a bit of a hamster wheel, you know, before your diagnosis, and it feels the same when you go back, get some help to change it, and to focus on the things that you like doing, the things you're best at, but also where you're going to add most value. And having that sort of adult conversation, I think, will help you to stop resenting work potentially, and to make work, you know, something that has positive therapeutic benefits for you, because, you know, as they say, life is too short.
Indeed. Was that famous phrase, no one on their deathbed ever said they'd wish they'd spent more time at the office?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for talking to us today. And thank you to all those who've been listening to this interview. If you would like to find out some more about the work we do at Working with Cancer, please get in touch with us via our website, which is which is workingwithcancer.co.uk, or contact us at admin@workingwithcancer, or call us on 07910 835 585. Thank you very much, and I hope the day goes well for all those who are listening to this recording. Thank you. Goodbye.